conversations, now that we heard what we just heard from the youth about incorporating them into our policy processes, making sure that we're developing policy that is most effective and supportive for them, but also making sure that our quality improvement and control processes, that our feedback loops incorporate young people. How do we go about best doing that? That is its own body of work here in California, and I have a panel here to talk about both the policymaking process, but also what is the perspective of those who are catching all of the policy that we pass in California. And Breaking Barriers had the honor of being asked by the Health and Human Services Department a couple of years ago to write a paper about whether or not all of the current initiatives that have been developed in the state of California for children, whether it's community schools or CYBHI or early care or expanded learning, or there were a lot of initiatives that came out, whether those would result in the transformed, united, integrated system that serves the whole child, by, for, and with the whole child. And our paper did research, and it's online if you want to see it. It's called the Ecosystem Working Paper. But really what we found was that we have to be very intentional about unity and community. We have to be very intentional about uniting our initiatives, uniting our organizations, uniting our efforts. How many of you work in the field in a system that feels siloed? How many of you are working in a system that feels siloed within your silo? Right? So it's not, we're siloed from our communities, we're siloed from our other agencies that are simultaneously serving youth and children, but not necessarily together. Breaking Barriers started because I practiced law in the juvenile justice system, in the child welfare system, and in the behavioral health system, and in the education system, and I was able to see that they weren't united in care. So when I went through a break and recovery and I could get what I need when I needed it, I went to work in a world where I could see children and youth not being able to get what they need when they needed it, not because the resources weren't necessarily available to them. We're always going to need more resources, but sometimes because of the system being siloed. And so I started talking about integrating the system, which is what we're here to do. Well, in the context of Breaking Barriers over the years, I've had policymakers come to me and say, wait a second. How we do policy impacts how united you are, or integrated you are, or capable you are of actually offering children what they need when they need it together. You're trying to solve for challenges that the policy process sometimes creates. So we started thinking about policy. Then when we wrote the ecosystem paper, we found that a lot of the responses that we got in that research was, well, if they could just do policy differently, then we could unite better at the local level. We could actually realize a more transformed system, more integrated, more whole child system at the local level. So then we had the honor this past year of writing the policy paper, which is a paper about how to think about the impact of policy on an integrated system at the local level, and the processes, how to integrate our policymaking process so that it better realizes a more integrated system at the local level. This is a pretty groundbreaking conversation. This is something that we aren't talking about a lot yet, but we will be. How do we look at our policy process in California and use that, change that, to better integrate the system at the local level? After this panel presents, we're going to present our policy paper. We're going to take a break, and then you're going to come back and we're going to do research in this room. We're going to do research on your input on this, because Breaking Barriers is all about moving the needle, getting your input, and then every year we just keep leaning into the things that we hear. So be sure that you're here to give us your input, because we're going to be doing ongoing research. You're going to take a survey. You're going to have this conversation. What are your suggestions for policy reform? Not just the policy that we pass, but how we develop policy, how we do our quality improvement and control on our policy. So that's our afternoon. Okay. Before we start, and I got a thumbs up, thank you. I want each one of my esteemed panelists here to just introduce yourself and what your role is in policy development in California. Let's just start with.
Hi, my name is Debbie Look, and I am a principal consultant in the Assembly Education Committee. So we deal with issues from pre-K through 12th grade and in legislature on the Assembly side.
Hi, everyone. My name is Navdeep Purewal. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services at the Sacramento County Office of Education. We also lead the State Transformational Assistance Center for the California Community Schools Partnership Program. And I would say definitely on the policy implementation side, but also really excited to be able to provide input today on the policy making side as well.
Good afternoon. Dr. Marni Sandoval. I am a licensed psychologist by training and have been in the behavioral health field for over 30 years. I spent about 25 years with Monterey County Behavioral Health. Happy to see a bunch of Monterey folks back there today. Glad you guys are here. Overseeing the children's system of care for a very long time, and extremely pleased to be part of the Santa Cruz County Behavioral Health System and community now as the behavioral health director there. I've been involved, of course, in direct service and program oversight and implementation, but I've also had the distinct pleasure over the last 5 to 7 years doing a lot of work with Breaking Barriers, with Elizabeth, working with the state, participating in the ecosystem working paper policy input with the County Behavioral Health Directors Association, with Cal HHS and DHCS, as well as CDSS.
That is a lot of acronyms.
That is a lot. Alphabet soup. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trina Frazier, and I work for Fresno County Superintendent of Schools, and I work in student services as their assistant superintendent. And we provide mental health services to our schools in Fresno County, the fourth largest county in the state. And we have a program called All for Youth, and we finally now have all 3 tiers of behavioral health services in our county. So,
Phew. Okay, so getting started with our panel here. We use the word whole child a lot in this symposium, and I spoke about that this morning. But I really, and I defined it this morning. Supporting the whole child means supporting the full range of social, emotional, physical, and cognitive needs and assets of young people, a la what our young people told us earlier. And we want to keep that in mind while we're having this conversation. And it really means paying attention to the context that young people experience, which we just heard about. Knowing that their social, emotional, cognitive, and physical development is interconnected. People talk about reading scores, teaching children how to read. In order for children to read, they have to be centered and they have to be whole. So reading, if I ask someone, did we meet our reading metric in a county or in California? Who does everybody say that job is? Whose job is it to make sure children are reading? Schools, teachers, education. Is it transportation's job? Is it housing's job? Is it health's job? Is it human services job? The answer will always be education, but the reality is it is all of our jobs. All of those impact our children's ability to read or do anything, achieve any goal that we set, which is why Breaking Barriers really leans into shared leadership, but also shared goals and shared accountability processes so that we can all lean into reading together, right? We can all lean into transportation together because they need transportation in order to learn to read. So we want to be thinking about that. So I just want to ask Trina, Nav, and Marni, how does the concept of whole child in the field resonate with your work? And how could a shared understanding of that maybe help make policy more coherent in California?
I think what happens a lot of times when we look at policy making is that we don't talk to each other when we do it. And so we have different areas of eligibility, different areas of reporting requirements, different ways to input the information, different systems to use for everything we do. And so it really does affect us in the field, and we don't talk to one another. And so for us, I think that is a real barrier for us a lot of times. Now, we have had a lot of success with some things as well that we'll talk about a little later, but I think that's a huge barrier for us, and that's how it affects us in education a lot of times, and other agencies as well. It's not just us.
When I think about the concept of whole child, I have to back up quite a bit. As a clinician by training, I trained as a very young person to really think from a systems perspective. And you know, my colleagues in mental health, many of you are going to understand that fundamentally when we're trying to help a child, a youth, a family, an adult that's struggling, we have to think about the systemic impacts. There are many different theories of systems care. If you think about Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, I mean, it really puts, you know, the child and the family in the middle and all of the imposing systems, including all the way out to society and the impacts of culture and time on an individual. And we think like that. And so I share that because that thinking really transcends clinical care. It really has shaped how I step into space when I'm doing any kind of work. Even in my personal life, but professionally as well. And so as I work within the behavioral health system, and I have always thought I need to be intersecting with my system partners because we're all serving the same kids and families. And I think from a policy standpoint, we have to think about the fact that humans are very complex. One size does not fit all. We have to bring the collective knowledge and the collective impact of all of us together if we're going to develop policy that's going to be impactful in a successful and sustainable way.
I'll also share, the community schools work really being a strategy to support the whole child, right? And oftentimes folks say, well, we're not a community schools grantee. Well, hey, every school needs to be supporting the whole child, regardless of your funding, regardless of, what the needs are of your communities and building upon those assets. And so in thinking about that, thinking about the whole child, we know that meeting the needs of students is crucial in ensuring that they're able to learn. We do not send our children, and our families do not send their children to school just to be well, right? That's great. That is the first kind of place that we need to do a stop and check and say, are the students well, right? And then it is, how are they learning? How are we teaching? How are we engaging those students? And I just want to, connect for a second. Even as a whole adult, our needs have been met today. We received agendas in advance. We had an idea of what was going to happen today. We were able to come in with probably a lower kind of sense of concern, fear, not knowing, but feeling connected. We had opportunities through Roberto's keynote of connecting with each other, of building community and building space. We had food to ensure that we were present. We weren't hungry. Have water in front of us. So really thinking about how we connect with each other as adults even, and how crucial it is for us to be creating those systems and those spaces within our schools as well to support the whole child.
Okay, so I want to move into policy and its impact. So I want to start with Trina, Nava, Marni, same three people. What are examples? Well, first of all, does legislation and policy impact your ability to integrate or unite at the local level? Does it even make a difference? Or do we just pass it and then you guys make sense of it and then it becomes all holistic?
I could go back on absolutely. Yes, it does impact us. And one of the ways I just want to reference even to our panel with our youth. They really want us to hear about what their needs are. We actually do inherently know when we are seeing our students in our schools, in our district, what the needs are. Sometimes with policy implementation, at the school site levels and the districts and the counties, we're not readily able to implement those policies to provide those supports to students when they are needed and for them to be able to readily access them. And I think it absolutely impacts because, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, it's oftentimes folks are saying, well, it's a school's responsibility in terms of academics. Well, if policies are really not aligned and are siloed, then implementation becomes siloed. And we are not connected. We are not operating in a whole child framework if we are in silos. So it absolutely do impact.
Marni or Trina, anything to add?
I can think of things that have aligned very well, and I can think of things that have worked against us a little bit. And one of the things in our county that has worked very well is SBHIP, Student Behavioral Health Incentive Program, working with the 2 managed care plans in our county, HealthNet, Calviva, and Anthem. And both of the individuals that we worked with are here today, Belinda and Alicia. Alicia is now with Santa Clara County Office of Ed, was with Anthem at the time. We were able to open 7 wellness centers, hire family partners. We acquired 4 mobile health therapy units. But it took building that relationship because we didn't know each other when we went into it. It took building that trust. It took collaboration. It took both of us doing what we said we were going to do. And it all came together. We followed a timeline. And so I can think of things like that that have worked very, very well in our county, but I can also think of things that haven't worked as well.
It's going to be impossible to fully answer this question in the short amount of time we have here. But what I can share from a perspective, think more macro level. That's what I am trying to do when Elizabeth is asking this question about, from a policy standpoint, what are some of the things that actually impact the ability for the systems to come together and function well? I think back to the development of the integrated core practice model. Like that actually really brought a lot of our agencies together. Child welfare, juvenile probation, behavioral health. We need a little bit more engagement with education to make it truly integrated, but it was a good start. And so I think from a policy standpoint, that's one example where we saw some success. There has been some successes with the original Assembly Bill 3632 in the education space, forcing behavioral health and education systems to come together to support the mental health needs of those kids with the highest tier of mental health needs. And even when that Assembly Bill was repealed, many of the California mental health plans, the behavioral health systems, kept their relationships with the education systems. Back in 2023, our county Behavioral Health Directors Association did a survey across our county mental health plans, and at that time, still 82% of California behavioral health plans had partnerships with their local education systems where they were either through contracted providers or county staff themselves were providing school-based mental health. So it did help bring us together. That's devolved a little bit, and maybe that's where I might share of like where can legislation help us silo more than we want to with the way that current structures are. There's many examples if we think back to foster kids needing access to mental health and the original approach around the service authorization requirements when kids are traveling out of county and still needing mental health, and that progression of the presumptive transfer process. It has been so complex and convoluted. If there's been so many cleanup bills that have been necessary. Let me just say that. We could have spent time early in the process talking to all the folks involved in child welfare, juvenile probation, behavioral health, the foster kids themselves, the foster family agencies, and really looking at what was needed to ensure smooth access to mental health. And maybe the legislation could have been cleaner and more productive from the beginning. Continuum of care reform, that's another one that's just completely siloed the system. I guess maybe I'll just step into reading you a little bit of data here around mental health and education settings, because a lot of us here are thinking about education, mental health, and when we think about policy and how has that further siloed us, if we look back to all of the different public funding streams that are impacting school-based mental health, there's so many. I just need to highlight these. We have Medi-Cal specialty mental health services. We have Medi-Cal managed care. We have the Mental Health Service Act, which will become the Behavioral Health Services Act. Educationally related mental health services. We have our local education area agencies, behavioral options program, so LEA BOP. Some of you may be familiar with that. Local control formula fundings. We've got Every Student Succeeds Act, or the ESSA, the Title I and Title IV, School-Based Medi-Cal Administration, SMAA, and we've got a bunch of one-time state and federal funds, $400 million in Medi-Cal managed care incentive payment programs, $550 million in school-linked behavioral health partnerships, $205 million through the Mental Health Student Services Act partnership grants, $2.8 billion in Community School Partnership Program, and $21 billion through federal COVID relief funding. And we're still all trying to figure this out. We're confused, we're siloed, and unfortunately, I've had the opportunity to see how all of these really good intentions at a state level, at a policy level, to really bring the care to kids and families where they need it, when they need it, and how they need it, has still failed. And we're dismantling decades of hard work of building successful partnerships between education systems and behavioral health because everyone's confused and thinks now we need to change. So we got to get rid of that and rebuild another system that's going to provide the same mental health that kids were getting access to before. So I would like for us to think about, we don't need to keep changing things. We need to look together at what's happening, what's needed, and we need to evolve. And if our legislative process could actually model that, we could have some pretty impactful legislation.
Looks like the crowd agrees. Okay, well, I'm going to turn to Debbie, who we're all involved in the policymaking process in some way. We're catching it, we're advocating for it, we're making it, we're writing it. Everyone here has a role, including the youth, in the policy process, which is the panel that we just had. So how do we change how we do policy prospectively? And we're going to figure that out. These are all works in progress. We, the people, built these systems. We, the people, are going to change them, but it takes time. And that time starts with owning the challenge and tackling it, which is what we're going to do. So, Debbie, in your observations as a policymaker about the current policymaking process in California and how it does or does not incentivize or promote integration of the children's system at the local level, have you been part of a policymaking process that really felt truly integrated across the committees at the state level and or with the people that are catching policy on the ground?
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll start kind of just to your
You
first
start where
point
you want.
around the around whether the current process incentivizes or doesn't promote integration. And I would contend that in general, it does not. We have kind of two systems within Sacramento, within the Capitol. We work through the legislative process, the bills that come through, and then we also have the budget process. So looking at the legislative side, we've got individual members, 80 assembly members and 40 senators all want to have their ideas put forward. These come from their constituents, they come from advocacy groups, and they come from a story they read in the news yesterday. And that unfortunately, the way that the system works, the timelines, things have to be introduced. They have to go through a process fairly quickly. We try to get input. We have hearings. We listen to people, but there's not really enough time. I think we almost never feel like we have enough time to really do the thoughtful policies, and mistakes get made, as Marni said, that there are times where if we'd thought about that point, we could have fixed it, but we didn't have time. So that issue of timing is an issue. of that kind of individual members. They all want to, I would say they all have good intentions. They are interested in issues like student mental health. That certainly had a lot of interest in the last few years. But they all tend to look at some small piece of it that they can do. That I can do this one small piece. I can't take on the whole system because I'm just one person, but I could take on this one little piece. So that's where we end up with the 14 different things that Marni mentioned, because each person wanted their win. So there's that kind of process. And then on the flip side, we're looking at the budget process, which is where the money comes from. In that process, the way that it works, the governor presents his or her budget proposal in January. The legislature and as staff, we very rarely have any input into that process or any idea of what's going to come. It's a big surprise in January. And then, kind of a back and forth again, a kind of a competitive system starts working. The Assembly and the Senate each have their own priorities. They push back against some of the governors. They agree with a few of the governors, and it's a back and forth kind of negotiation. There's budget hearings that people are able to come and speak, but again, you often get 1 minute to come in and make a comment, and so it's not an ideal process again to look at creating thoughtful policy. And in terms of your second question, Elizabeth, whether I've been part of something, I think one of the things Tanya and I and others have been coming to Breaking Barriers for a number of years, and we have been trying to do that work. I personally I work in both education, but also have had a lot to do with around the health issues and mental health. So I didn't understand those systems at all. We speak different languages. So I reached out to my colleagues in health committees, and, similarly, they didn't understand how schools work. What was a county office of education, and what was that for? So we learned to speak each other's language, and we've done a lot of really good work. I think we did a lot of work around LEA BOP reforms. We've done a lot of work on the CYBHI and MHSSA, all of these new programs that we've seen some really strong cooperation between our committees at least at the staff level, and we've managed to encourage our members to do some joint bills that have done some work in this area.
What do you think? So this is for Debbie again as a follow-up. What were the conditions or processes that sort of made that effort possible, a more holistic effort at developing policy for children and youth?
I think a couple things. I think one was a very real recognition, kind of system-wide, of the crisis in student mental health, that everyone saw that as an issue. The members were aware of it. They wanted something to happen. We certainly understood that. And so that, and I think personal relationships, I think the willingness at the staff level to work together, because that's not something that we are encouraged or set up to do, but to say, oh, I'm going to step out of my traditional role and go talk to somebody else who knows something about this, that we can work together. So I think those two things. I think the fact that it was a clearly overriding issue that members wanted us to work on, and then the willingness kind of at the personal level to develop those relationships and kind of add on to the work, our normal workload, to do something different that was bigger.
Is that part of our operational design right now? Or is that, I'm just trying to get at
No, I don't think it is. I think we're trying to do that, but it is not the way that our system works. That, as I said, the timing and everything is done under very tight deadlines. We don't necessarily have time to go out and explore and learn from each other. We try to do that at times. We try to, during the fall, we're doing site visits, and we try to do things that we, try to expand our repertoire, but it's not really built into the system, I would say.
Okay, so final question for all of you, and I'll start with Trina, and we can work down. what are your hopes or suggestions for changes in our policymaking process here in California? It could be for the processes themselves, or it could be for a policy that you think, oh, that would be really helpful right now, given where we are where we all are in the state of California in our work. Or it could be both.
I think integration is really about aligning what we have. So I don't think it's like we need more. I think we need to align what we already have for true integration. And I would like to see everybody work together. Like I think one of our youth presenters said, "Nothing about us without us." And I think that's really, really important that we all work together. The policymakers work together, the Department of Finance works together, we work together, all the agencies, behavioral health, education. I think we have to tackle this together when we're looking at policy and how it's going to affect all of us. It's really, really important. I mean, you've explained how much money we've invested, Marni, and now we're going to start again. It's just really, really crucial that we work together and align what we already have.
Yeah, definitely agree with everything Trina just shared. I think part of, listening to what Debbie was talking about resonated with me because I've always thought that we need to also really openly acknowledge the reality that there's an interplay between the political and budget cycle in everything we're doing. I know on the ground, we are just constantly dealing with legislative fatigue. And it really has to do with that turnover and rapidity of the cycle, different legislators coming in and having specific, important agendas. I don't say any of this to imply, that they don't have good intentions. I think truly, collectively, we're all thinking about the well-being of kids, youth, families, communities, but it gets caught up in the power of the political cycle. And how do I make sure I do something so I can get elected again? And so it gets lost. And it would be amazing to me, truly, Elizabeth, answering your question, could we have a process at the state level politically where state departments, as part of the process, regularly actually model and practice an integrated approach to how things are done? Like they practice it. We're going to need to align structures, organizationally in the way that resources are shared. But it would really require an intentional integration effort with a collective impact mindset and the way that things are designed so that we would really have true partnership, like Trina was mentioning. We'd have to take risks. People would have to let go of power, whatever that looks like and means. Power would have to be, let it go. We're all in this together for the same reason, right? And building trust and relationships, and importantly, including the voice of the communities we're serving, the youth and the families.
So I've been thinking about a time where I felt coherence within a county office of education. And I've served at a county office of education, 2 different ones for a total of 10 years now. And I can share that the one time that I have felt like I belonged in a system that was coherent was unfortunately when COVID-19 happened. And that was responsive, right? We came together as a cabinet and we joined forces with public health, with the California Department of Ed, with all those we needed to statewide, with other county offices of ed in our state, and we wrapped around our communities. We had vaccination clinics up within, days. And it was the first time. And I can honestly share, haven't felt it since. And I appreciate, Debbie, this idea around the joint policies, the integrated policy practices, and the integrated service delivery. But I also think, and I also appreciate the opportunity and desire to want to do study tours and go out to the fields and listen to folks in county offices of ed, LEAs, and sites, and to really understand how all of this siloing of policies and practices is really dysregulating our system and is inhibiting us from really meeting the needs of those who are the center of our societies, our students, our youth, our children, right? Who are going to continue to really grow and to build what we have designed for them. And so now is really our time. And so I appreciate this intentionality around thinking about an integrated service delivery. And I think from the County Office of Ed perspective, like we need to be proactive, and even from the district and site levels. How are we, as Marni mentioned, how are we getting out of our silos? How are we, I remember coming into the Sacramento County Office of Education and connecting with colleagues and saying, I may step on your toes, but I think that's okay because I'm doing it for the right reason. And I hope you understand that and will understand that. And I will share with the Community Schools, California Community Schools Partnership Program, the Whole Child strategy. I do think that that was intentional. I appreciated that. The 4 pillars, integrated student services, enriched learning, collaborative leadership, expand all of those things, really does try to wrap around, really does try to cohere programs and systems. It tries to bring things out that were, that were released kind of siloed with children youth behavioral health initiatives, expanded learning opportunities program time, and then community schools is really kind of the container to operationalize all these things. And once again, not only for grantees, but it is a model to utilize and a framework to utilize to make sense of all of this funding that we have that has really, unfortunately, kind of dysregulated our systems and us as leaders and practitioners and implementers. Because oftentimes, it does feel as though I think really intentionally after COVID-19, maybe policymakers thought, wow, these county offices of ed can really pull it together. They can really work across agencies in their counties with public health and the state. And maybe they're ready for all of this now. And we weren't. And we're still building that muscle. And we're still trying to crack that nut. And we have turnover. Right? So how do we actually have a moment to strengthen this system, to build that muscle? Because we also, as leaders and educators, we also experienced what our communities experienced during the pandemic. We experienced the disconnect. So when funding started to come back out and folks ran back into their silos, said, oh, we're done cohering. We're good. I got my money. I got my plan. I'm going to go implement. I'm going to run. And that's where we are. Unfortunately, I feel like our silos have actually even strengthened post-pandemic, which is ironic because we came together as a nation in such a cohesive way. And I think we really did serve our students and our families and communities, and we just need to get back there.
Yeah, I think I just want to also share on the heels of those really important words that Navdeep shared, that I've been really trying to hold and share that all of these things that we're talking about today are realities in our world. And I think all of us can acknowledge, if you take a breath for a minute, our world is a little wild right now. And it can feel overwhelming, it can feel hopeless, but I'd like to really lift up the opportunity that we have. And as Navdeep was talking about COVID, we have another really critical moment in our history, in our world right now. And we can seize it because out of real challenge and suffering can come change, come evolution, come things that we would never, ever think about otherwise. So we have a really good opportunity here.
And I would just say from a policy perspective, and so much agree with all of my colleagues here on the points that they're making, is that at the, Sacramento and the policy coming out of here, I think as we said, is good intentions. Everybody expects that all of these programs are going to be integrated. As Navdeep said, we expected that community schools and expanded learning and universal meals and universal TK are all going to be this wonderful thing that all work together. But unfortunately, they're all separate funding streams. Some of them are grant programs, some of them are one-time money that's going to run out. There's different reporting requirements. There's different people responsible for them. There's different departments managing them. And so, we had this grand idea that this was all going to be integrated, but unfortunately we didn't put the mechanisms, the levers in place in order to make that happen. And that's the unfortunate thing, is going from a vision of great things. And fortunately, a lot of these programs came when there was some actual money to be spent, and that changes too. The money starts going away, and then those programs, how do we look at sustaining things that we started with one-time money, and the need to really think long term?
Thank you so much.